Today's reading is Psalm 65. Praise is due to you, O God in Zion, and to you shall vows be performed, O you who answer prayer. To you all flesh shall come. When deeds of iniquity overwhelm us, you forgive us our transgressions. Happy are those whom you choose and bring near to live in your courts. We shall be satisfied with the goodness of your house, your holy temple. By awesome deeds, you answer us with deliverance, O God of our salvation. You are the hope of all the ends of the earth and of the farthest seas. By your strength, you establish the mountains. You are girded with might. You silence the roaring of the seas, the roaring of their waves, the tumult of the peoples. Those who live at the earth's farthest bounds are awed by your signs. You make the gateways of the morning and the evening shout for joy. You visit the earth and water it. You greatly enrich it. The river of God is full of water. You provide the people with grain, for so you have prepared it. You water its furrows abundantly, settling its ridges, softening it with showers, and blessing its growth. You crown the year with your bounty. Your wagon tracks overflow with richness. The pastures of the wilderness overflow. The hills gird themselves with joy. The meadows clothe themselves with flocks. The valleys deck themselves with grain. They shout and sing together for joy. Here ends the reading.
Now we have an innovation today. Instead of a second reading, we're adding a song, and this one is called River. And if you're here in the sanctuary, it is in the black notebook. And if you like to just read the words without the music, if you flip to the back of the page, you'll see just the words. And of course, the words are on the screen. We've sung this before, so it won't be totally new. I spent a good part of yesterday sitting by a river. It was the San Lorenzo River down in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And I was there for a special event. It was an event long delayed by COVID and various other things, but we were there to dedicate a tree to our friend Jane, who died 3.5 years ago now. And she had made a contribution to the Semper Virens Fund, which protects redwoods, and we were there to remember her and to celebrate her memory. And I was reminded there about water, because it's such a part of the psalm we heard today, which is also, of course, why I chose the hymn that we did just now. There is a sense of something new coming when you're at a river. It's always coming, coming. You don't quite know what's coming. And that's a little bit of the reflection in this psalm. We can think of the Psalms as the prayers of Jesus. These are the prayers that Jesus knew. They are the songs of the temple and of the people from hundreds of years before. Of course, just like us, they would continually make new ones as well, like River. So these are the prayers of Jesus. And one thing I notice when I read a psalm, as opposed to reading a story about Jesus or a prophet or Moses, very seldom when they talk about God, do they refer to God as he or in the third person. It's usually God as you, God. So we had in this psalm today, you, God, praise is due to you, God. And what a nice thing about that opening verse there is that the grammar of it is a little bit unusual in Hebrew. And so if you read different translations of this psalm, you'll hear different ways to state that opening line. And my favorite of the alternatives was from the Jewish scholar Robert Alter, who wrote, "To you, silence is praise." Because silence is a word that's in that line, which is usually left out. In a sense, this psalm is a testimony. It's a collective testimony, a group of people saying, we have been called by God to be here together. We remember this great creation of which we are a part, God's handiwork. And we give great thanks today for this bountiful harvest, a result of a bountiful year of rain. And we can relate to that, having just had a bountiful year of rain. And I don't know that it will show up for us so much in the foods that we harvest and eat, because we use irrigation so much more these days, but it certainly is showing up if you go out in the fields and the woods. The wildflowers, the shrubs are just shouting and singing for joy. If you don't mind me using a metaphor or personifying nature, my high school English teacher comes back to me here, who taught us that personification is when you give the personality of a person to someone who isn't a person. Well, we might think of it as personification, but we also might think that for many people in the world, all the parts of nature are beings who might indeed sing to God. So this psalm is full of metaphor and personification and glory and beauty. That's what it's about. Now, this is a psalm of celebration. Sometimes we hear a psalm of lament where someone is ill or suffering or persecuted. And sometimes we hear a psalm that teaches us how to live. This one is one that Walter Brueggemann calls a psalm of reorientation. It says, we're just bringing ourselves back to what we know. We're very fortunate here in California to live in what's called a Mediterranean climate. And that is a climate with warm, dry summers and cool, wet winters, because it's very much like the climate of Palestine and very much like the climate our psalm writers lived in. And they too were dependent on the winter rains to water their crops. They grew much of their grain over the winter because it was cool. It wasn't freezing in the lower elevations. And so in June, there would be a great harvest. And a great harvest again in September, especially from the fruit trees. So sometimes when I read a psalm or anything in the Bible that talks about climate and weather, it allows me to put it in a certain time of the year. And so for this one, I am imagining it's this time of the year. And of course, with this kind of weather and climate can come chaos as well. We've seen the floods. We've seen drought. We have seen people suffering because of the abundance of what we desire, this rain, what we need, this rain. Now, some of us might have trouble with the language of the psalm. If we usually try to translate God language into something like we sang in River, maker, giver, lover, these images for God, rather than what we imagine as the ancient Hebrew God, which for many of us was actually painted in the 15th century and probably wasn't at all their image of God at all. But they did talk about how human beings are made in the image of God. And so we imagine God in their view as something a little bit like us. Someone with hands, someone with power to build and accomplish things, but an immeasurable power and immeasurable capacity. To you, silence is praise, O God in Zion. We're sometimes uncomfortable with this word Zion today because it has come to be used in what is then used as a pejorative sense of the Jewish desire to return to Israel. Zion, in this psalm and at this time, referred to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, or sometimes specifically to the temple itself, or specifically to God's presence in the temple. So praise is due to you, O Holy One. Now for Christians, some project this Zion into being a heavenly Zion. I don't think we need to do that. It is certainly an option for us. But it is also perhaps where we say, to you who answer prayers, to you all flesh shall come. Happy are those whom you choose and bring near. In a sense, we can recognize that There is something deep in our spirits that has been called to this place to celebrate together this life and this world and all that we have been given, all that we have received. We shall be satisfied with the goodness of your house, your holy temple. Satisfaction is not a popular mode in our present day culture because we are cultivated to want more and more. More clothes, more rooms in our house, more food, more luxuries, more cars, more concerts, more books. That's mine. Books. That's where I perhaps spend money that I spend on the basis of desire and perhaps some need, but certainly beyond my capacity. I do have books that I have never read. I thought I would read them. For some people, this collection of books we intend to read is a symbol to us of something important. But we might think about that. What are our true desires? What are our true needs? How can we live truly in light of all the gifts that we as human beings and as individual communities and families and even individual people that we have received? How do we live best? Because by awesome deeds, you answer us with deliverance, O God, of our salvation. Is there a way that our trust in this God of mountains and rivers, this God of fields and harvests, this God of singing people can allow us to be delivered from the things we want or things we do that we know are not really the best for us or for our world? There are other things that we might gather and cultivate that are often not very useful to us. One of them I notice is fear. Much of the proclamations that we're hearing about gay people and transgender people from conservative people in this country is cultivated by fear. It's not cultivated by love of all people or deep caring for all people. It's a fear cultivated that our world as we live in it and we believe in it is going to be taken away from us. And it's going to be given to these people who are practically not even human to us. We've been disturbed this last few weeks to notice the implementation of a law in Uganda that calls for the death penalty against gay people. Not the first time you're arrested, but if you're discovered to be gay or be supporting or promoting people who are gay, you are liable to be arrested. And if you continue, then execution is a possibility. And no one has been executed yet. We don't know how many have been arrested because they've been arrested all along. But one thing that we see happening is that in clinics for treating people with HIV, many of whom are gay men, people are afraid to come for their treatments because they might be there arrested for being gay. And even the physicians and medics and nurses who provide the medications could be seen as promoting LGBTQ plus people, and perhaps liable to arrest. So these decisions are caused not by a love of God or a love from God, but a fear cultivated by human cultures seeking to entrench their own power, their own rule, not the will of the people, not the being of the people, not the living and lives of the people, not the good and loving lives of the people. And so the poem says, "You are the hope of all the ends of the earth." Now today we imagine, we even understand, and some of us have perceived earth as a sphere. So when we say ends of the earth, where can that be? But for the ancient Hebrews, at least at the time they wrote this psalm, their image of the earth was very different. Earth was land and seas. They knew of some very distant places, but earth was land and seas and people in some of those places. Earth had a dome for the sky, and in that dome would shine during the day the sun, and in the night the moon and the stars, the planets. And above that dome were the waters. And rain would come when God opened a door in the heavens and let those waters down. Or opened another door and the snow would come down. The line here, earth's farthest bounds, that was understood as the east. And in the morning, God would open a door and the sun would rise and cross the sky. And then there was another door for the moon, which might open at a different place on a different day. And the stars too would change. All created, all understood as the work, as the vision, as the hope, as the dream of God. Little personification there for God, huh? For those of us who do our best to understand God as not an image, not a body, but as an abstract power and love in the universe. Some of these images sound strange, but I think it's good to practice them from time to time. Because indeed, we don't bring the sun up in the morning. That was established by cosmic evolution. We don't bring the moon up in the evening. That too, established by cosmic evolution and over long periods, billions of years. I recently was listening to an interview podcast with John Dominic Crossan, and he said, well, if you don't know who John Dominic Crossan is, he is a well-known biblical scholar, primarily New Testament, but really the whole scriptures. And he has written many books, many of them on a somewhat popular level, to show people other ways that we can read scripture besides a literal interpretation. And he says, I found that when I read the Bible through and I crossed out the word God and I replaced it with evolution, it almost made perfect sense. And for some of us, that helps us extend the realm of the time of creation. And for some of us, it helps give a concept, at least, to God, but not necessarily something we would worship. It's complicated, isn't it? It's complicated to think about who, what, how, when, where God is. If God is for some of us. I used to say sometimes at the start of the service, you're welcome here if you're an atheist or an agnostic or a deep believer, anywhere in between or in a different direction. Because we're not here to say that we know the ultimate truth of who and how God is, but to say that we too are on that journey of the river, that journey of the river of life, that journey that takes us from our birth to our death and who knows what beyond. We're trying to make sense of it, and we're trying to make sense of it in the tradition that Jesus brought to us, the teachings that Jesus brought to us about love and gratitude and generosity and welcome. Those lessons we don't hesitate over. Sometimes I think that's why we focus on what Jesus does on earth, because that's something we can visualize and imagine and try to do ourselves. You silence the roaring of the seas, the roaring of their waves, the tumult of the peoples. Those who live at earth's farthest bounds are awed by your signs. The psalmist, the writers of this psalm are reminding us that every being created by God is in awe of what this is, how we are, where we are, how we got here. Awe, by the way, is supposed to be a very healthy thing to feel. And so if you can arrange some awe in your life, it's a good thing. And it's not that hard. Just get up in the morning and look about the room at the people with you and say, wow. Or step out the door and see a flower and really open your eyes and you can say, wow. Or go out to the food distribution for the San Francisco Marin Food Bank, and see all these people there to serve people. And you can say, wow. This is something that we don't tend to cultivate, but it's supposed to be healthy for us. Because you who called us here, you who drew us here, you who imagined us into being, you who we have so much trouble to talk about, you make the gateways of the morning and the evening shout for joy. And that is the message here. This is a psalm of people who, in this year, at this time, know that they have what they need. And they have enough to give. You remember at the start of the psalm about paying a vow, a sacrifice to God, saying, we have more than enough we can share. So it's one of those years, like most of the years for us here in this church, when we have more than enough for our mornings and our evenings, when we can shout for joy, when we can say, wow. So just let's remember those gateways of morning and evening, or those gateways to our house or to this church. All the gateways that open before us and remind us this is the day that our God has made. We will rejoice and be glad in it. We will rejoice. Amen.